some just general housekeeping. So today we're going to be discussing just email basics and common reasons why your emails might not be going through or being flagged as spam, ways to get around that. I know as a marketer, a lot of my job is figuring out how to get my emails into people's inboxes. So this is a pain point for a lot of people. At the end, we are going to have a section for Q&A. However, I do encourage you guys to ask questions throughout. We are going to be monitoring that. So happy to pause through if a term goes over your head or you just missed something. We want this to feel like a conversation, so just feel free to add in throughout. And I will pause, or Michael will pause and answer your questions. You also want to stay until the end because we are going to be giving away an air tag. So definitely want to stay and stick around until that happens. There'll be one more attendee. So let's see here. So at the end, very end, after we do Q&A and get to the presentation, one of you is going to win an air tag. So definitely want to stick until that. Other than that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael, who's our Chief Technical Officer. He's going to be handling the presentation today, and he is much more well-versed on this subject than I am. So I'm going to turn off my camera. But again, please feel free to ask questions throughout. And thank you guys all for being here with us this morning.
Thank you, Reese, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinar, a series we started recently. And as Reese indicated, and as you can see on the screen in front of you, we're going to be talking about email both this month as well as next month, but in two different ways. One of the questions we get a lot from people, and have been getting a lot since February, has been, what are all these new email rules? And if you haven't been paying attention, or it's not really in your job, back on the 1st of February, both Google and Yahoo came out and said, if you are sending bulk mail, you must follow these new rules. If you do not, they will start removing messages from getting through to their systems. And as you can imagine, Yahoo and Google are two of the three largest mail providers. Well, Microsoft wasn't far behind, and earlier this month, Microsoft started putting in new requirements. So what we're going to talk about today is, what does it take to get your message through? What are some of the things you should be doing? Because while these requirements affect bulk mail, they are in fact going to affect regular mail as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. And as Reese said, if you have questions, we have a Q&A component here within Teams. Just go ahead and put them up there. And as I see the questions, or as we get a good chance to stop in between, I'll be happy to answer those. So today, what we're going to talk about is key definitions, just so you have an understanding of what we're talking about. We're going to talk about how email works, keep it real simple. We're going to talk about what are the reasons your messages may not be getting through, some of the best practices you can do to provide email deliverability. We'll briefly touch upon protecting your messages and why that's important. For the most part, most people don't realize that Microsoft and Google, who own about 90% of the email market, will not back up your messages beyond a period of time. And in fact, when you sign the agreement to work with them, they tell you they're not going to back them up. And then finally, as Reese just talked about, we will do an AirTag giveaway at the end, and we will ship you one of those AirTags once we've selected that winner. So some key definitions. As you can see on the screen, we're going to talk just basically understanding what they are. So what is a portal? If you go to the web version of email for either Google or Microsoft, and those are really the two we're going to talk about during today's call, it is a way to access your mail, your files, etc. Everything is web-based. It's known as SaaS, or software as a service. And so it's important to know that if someone says, hey, you need to go to the portal, that's what they're talking about. When it comes to security and changes and updates, you're going to have to go to the portal. If you're not familiar with Office 365, that's Microsoft's version. What Microsoft basically has indicated is this is what they will provide and what's included. So it's an entire collaboration suite. It involves a lot more than what we're going to talk about today, but the biggest piece of their collaboration suite is their email, which is typically utilized by Outlook, SharePoint, which is a file and process collaboration tool, and then OneDrive. On the Google side, you have G Suite. Again, you have their email, Google Email or Gmail, which is where they handle their email. It's 100% web-based. They do not have a software tool, although you can utilize things like Outlook or Thunderbird to access it. And then Google Drive, where they store their files. We're not going to touch upon either Microsoft or Google's applications, such as Excel or Sheets or Docs or Word, but we will, in fact, talk about how the email works. The term bounce, if I utilize the term bounce, and it's especially utilized in messages where you're sending from a constant contact, a MailChimp, etc., that is any message that gets rejected. It can be a permanent rejection, it can be a part, it doesn't really matter. If you hear the term bounce, that's what that means. Phishing, spelled with a PH as opposed to an F. And there's a lot of things out there, but phishing is essentially where people are trying to get you to open an email that's not legitimate. It's called phishing because they're throwing it out there and then trying to lure you in. And so that is they create a website, they create an email that looks official. An example of that is if you have information on your LinkedIn page that says where you went to college and what year you graduated, that is data they're going to use. So if you graduated in the year 2004 and you went to, say, UVA, you may randomly get a UVA 20-year anniversary or 20-year reunion is coming up. Please sign up and do that. And that, in fact, will be a way to get you in. Then you go to the site, you provide more information, and they're just creating a database of you. And then finally, spam, which is unsolicited, unwanted junk mail, made popular back in the day with the quote unquote Cialis and Viagra drugs and other things like that. But it's basically any unwanted email. So how does email work? And I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. Basically, there are mail servers. That is where your mail sits until you access it. So if you're utilizing Office 365, Microsoft has a server somewhere in one of their data centers where the email sits. You then utilize your computer. So in this particular case, Jane, although it says Gmail, it works the same way. You access the server by going, you connect to it, you pull down the messages or you view them live. When you go to send a message, you go on your machine, you write it, the server gets it. It then sends it off to the other server. Now, in order to do that, it needs to access where the domain is. So if you're sending it to abc.com, you need to know, that mail server needs to know where is abc.com. And it's going to look up the DNS or domain name service to find out where to send it. Now, why that's important, we'll get to in a few minutes when we talk about DKIM and DMARC. But that is how it works. And then it sends it to that server. The server says, yep, I have this domain. Yep, you know, this particular user exists and you don't look like spam, so I'll let you through. And then the other person accesses it. The SMTP and the IMAP, don't worry about. Those are just protocols and how you can access the data. But the key to realize is that when you send a message, it's the mail server connecting to the other mail server based upon your domain name. So why do some messages not get through? Well, a couple things to realize. One, 31 billion emails bounce every day. So think about that. 31 billion emails are actually bouncing, not getting through. 347 billion emails are sent and received each day. So from that perspective, 10% are not getting through. Doesn't sound like it's bad, but again, when 10% is 31 billion, that's a lot of messages. Spam emails make up 85% of all emails sent. Okay, that's just emails that you did not ask for. Doesn't mean they're not legitimate emails. You could call an email you get from Microsoft if you didn't sign up for it a spam email. But 85% of all emails that are spam. Financial matters, other things, spam. We can talk about what causes a spam, but and spam is no longer just an email thing. You now have what's called smishing, which is getting SMS or text messages. But what you have to realize is when you have this amount of messages being sent through the email servers are utilizing algorithms, mathematical formulas to determine whether or not to allow your message through. So if they're using these formulas, you need to know what needs to be done to make sure you do not get flagged as a potential fake or bad email, even if you're not. So quick poll question here for those who want to partake. So the question is, when was the last time you received an undeliverable message? So up on your screen, Phil, go ahead and indicate what did you get an undeliverable? And an undeliverable message is you got a notification back saying, it didn't go through. So based on what I see so far, we've got 50-50. So it's a variety of things. So I'll let that continue to gather data, but why don't they go through? Well, as an IT provider, we get this question all the time. And what you have to realize is in the NDR, which is the message that comes back to you, it actually tells you why, if you know what to look for. Majority of all items that come through is an incorrect email address. So whether you spelled the domain name wrong, whether you put it as first initial last name when it was first name underscore last name, it doesn't really make a difference. But what basically has to determine is why it happened. Next is blocked by spam filters. Well, again, we're using this math, and the math is basically saying your message is spam. The question is why? Why are you being flagged as spam? And in the message that bounces back, it'll actually tell you. Usually has a link and it says this is why. Could be mail server issues. Very rare, because in most cases, a mail server is going to reattempt to send that message. Attachment size. This is a big one with Microsoft. They do have a very strict restriction on how big of an attachment can be sent through. Blacklisting. Now, you may have sent a legitimate email today, but if you had sent out a variety of messages that weren't legitimate, that people marked you off as not being legitimate, your domain can be blacklisted. Also realize that your domain can be blacklisted for nothing you've done wrong. It just happens to be the company you utilize to send messages, whether that be a Constant Contact or MailChimp. And I'm not saying one's better versus the other, but they can in fact get blacklisted by the IP address. And then when it goes to send out your messages, you're on that blacklist. Could be domain issues, rare, but it does occur. Firewall and antivirus settings, depending on how you're handling your email, could block it. And then not as common anymore, because most of the organizations out there provide a large amount of space, but the inbox could be full for the person you're looking to send it to. So a couple other statistics on spam and phishing. One is phishing is the primary delivered method for ransomware. Ransomware is a multi-billion-dollar industry of getting people to click on things that they can then take control of your machine and data. Now, what does this have to do with email? Well, when you have a multi-billion-dollar industry, that is the amount of emails that are being sent out, is in the billions, just to get you to click on there. So if there are 236.1 million ransomware attacks globally in just 6 months in 2022, and those are the latest statistics we have, that is obviously telling you the amount of emails that have to go out just to get that many people to click on them. Nearly 96% of those attacks were conducted using email. So again, you have that aspect. Then the last piece I want to put on here is, I'm sure everybody on this call has seen, is that 15% of individuals, and I'm saying everybody, and it's saying 15%, but the amount of calls we get at our office, 15% of individuals have said they received an email impersonating their organization. I'm sure many of you have received an email impersonating your own self. So those are things to just keep in mind about why email is such a challenging aspect to deal with. So, quick poll question. When was the last time you received a spam message? And I will be amazed if you didn't get one within the last day. I receive at least 30 to 40 on a daily basis. Now, granted, I get 400 or 500 emails a day, so that is a little bit skewed. So again, we'll take a look at those stats. So we've talked about why email is a challenge. We talked about the fact that Google, Yahoo in February, and Microsoft this month have now said, you have to do things to prove to us that you are in fact who you say you are. Years ago, there was a tool called SPF, I'm about to talk about it in a minute, that came out. And then they came out with DMARC and DKIM. So what are these pieces? So SPF was a framework which was created, stands for Sender Policy Framework. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to indicate within your domain name who can send out emails on behalf of you. So a lot of people say, well, that's simple. If the mail's coming from my mail server, it should be legitimate. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. And the reason is, many of you send email from your mail server. So great, you can put in the fact that Outlook or Gmail is allowed to send email on your behalf. What if your organization is using spam filters? Proofpoint, Mail Protector, Barracuda, any of those. Well, you now need to add that that is a legitimate server to send the messages. And then you talk to your marketing department and they say, well, we send out messages utilizing mail software. So Constant Contact, MailChimp. And then they also say, well, we also utilize HubSpot. So when people collect it on our website, and sometimes messages, if they fill out a form on our website, comes from our website. So now you've got 5, 6, 7 servers who are sending out legitimate emails on your behalf. If you do not list all of those servers within that SPF record, what'll happen is the message will get bounced. Now, you can also just not list the SPF record, not have one, and then your messages are going to get bounced regardless because they're going to say, well, if you're a legitimate organization, you need to have that. So how does SPF work? It's quite simple. When a mail server goes to send a message, it says, all right, I need to send a mail message to opfinity.com. So it looks at the domain record or DNS, and it says, where do I find opfinity.com? So opfinity.com has what's known as a mail record or an MX record, and it basically says you need to send it, in our case, to Mail Protector, which is our spam filter. And then that goes to Office 365. It then says, great, now it says that, let's look at the SPF record and see if it's legitimate. So if we're sending out a message from Constant Contact and Yahoo or Google receives that message, it's going to say, oh, it's coming from Opfinity. The server that sent it to us, is that one of the legitimate servers? It is? Great, we'll let it through. If it isn't, we won't. Beginning in February, a majority of our clients were all of a sudden, because that's when everything started up, saying, oh, we need to have these set up, and not realizing that some people in their company may be utilizing a third-party tool to send messages. So this is very important. You really want to make sure you have an SPF. If you're not sure if your organization has one, just do a Google and type in SPF lookup. It'll take you to a tool, you put a domain name in there, it'll let you know. Any further questions on that, please just give us a call. We'll be happy to point you in the right direction. So as you can see, this is how SPF works. The sender gets it, the inbound mail server looks it up at the domain or DNS. It comes back and it says, yep, it's either good or it's bad. Now, you can determine, do I get rid of it right away, even if it doesn't come from the server, or do I look at other reputation? And then it determines one of 3 things. Put it in the inbox, put it in the junk mailbox, or quarantine it, or reject it, or block. In some cases, depending on how you set it up, you can just delete it. So realize that you may not even be aware of the messages you're sending are actually not even getting there because you're not getting a bounce. But these are things, if you set up your SPF properly, you can eliminate that. Well, that brings us to DKIM. Now, SPF has been there for many, many years. It's been working. A lot of people had them set up. But it wasn't enough because people were finding that they could spoof records. So next was, well, how else can we verify that the message actually is coming from the person who sent it? So they said, well, let's create a method that works like encryption. And the sense being is that if you're familiar with encryption, for those of us in my generation, you think about the decoder rings you used to get in the cereal boxes. You would spin it and an A meant to B or B meant to whatever, and you could decode that. That's how encryption works. In a similar way, cryptography or encryption, it uses what's called signatures. And it basically says that when I send a mail message, I'm going to put my signature, digital signature, on the message. I'm also going to put in a record up at the domain name again what my public signature is. And literally what the email servers will do is it'll take a look at the message coming in, it'll take a look at the public record and make sure they match. If it matches, it says, great, you're legitimate. If it doesn't match, it depends on how your mail server determines to do that, but that is what it does. Now, what this does better than SPF is it helps handle spoofing. Now, what is spoofing? Spoofing is basically you getting a message that looks like it came from yourself, Now, why isn't that stopped with SPF? Well, because people are sending messages utilizing your mail server to pretend to be you. So when they get the message saying, hey, I've created this fake message, it's coming through. With DKIM, you can have it so that it's going to check and say, all right, well, yeah, this looks like it's coming from you. It came from your message, so why wouldn't I deliver it to you? But realizing that your signature on that message is not legitimate. So it cannot get approved and delivered. And so that will help eliminate all of those. Now, with a DKIM signature, again, it's published. There is no necessary rejection. So you're not going to know, did it get through, did it not get through? And it also depends on if the server receiving it follows the DKIM method. Most of the major servers out there do. So how does that work? Again, you send an email with your private key. Receiving mail server says, all right, let's check the domain name record. Does the public key match the private key? It does. Great. We're going to send it to the inbox. It doesn't. All right, we're going to make a decision depending on your company and how you set it up to either mark it as spam or delete it or put it in junk mail. It really depends. But in most cases, DKIM does not bounce back. Which brings us to DMARC. Again, another framework. But the benefit of this framework is it allows you as your email domain owner to determine what happens. So if you're in the marketing side of things, you want to know, did your messages get through? Because if you're sending out 1,000 messages and only 100 people are actually seeing them, that's a problem. They may be using DKIM, they may not be using it. So what DMARC allows you to do is provide a policy that then sends you back results of whether the message went through. So it's really, if you do Google Analytics or anything like that, DMARC allows you to do that. So it helps confirm that things are going through. It helps confirm that you're getting feedback on what's happening. So again, DMARC, DKIM, SPF, most of that is set up at the policy level of your domain. But when you get to DMARC, you also have to do it at the server level. So if you're using Google or if you're using Office 365, you do it within those portals that we talked about earlier. And again, this is how DMARC works. Emails received, does it pass the authentication piece? No. If it does, yes, and then it gets filtered. If it doesn't, then you determine, does it get quarantined? Do you get rejected? Do you deliver a report to a sender? Again, not as important from a perspective. I would have your IT people take care of setting it up, but that's how it works and something you want to make sure you're doing to make sure your messages get through. So that brings me to what are the best practices? So we talked about setting up these records, but here are some quick troubleshooting / tips you can use to make sure your messages get through. So one, we just talked about it, DMARC, DKIM, and SPF setup. Make sure you've got those set up for your domain. If you do, it's going to help you avoid some of the other blacklists and other problems that we've talked about. If you are using HTML-based email, make sure your HTML is run through a validator. If you're not familiar with what a validator is, it's basically an online tool that you can utilize to make sure your code is correct. Another thing servers look at is if you're sending old code or code that doesn't work, it is going to reject it. You want to have a minimum of a 60/40 text to image ratio, but honestly, I would say that's still too much. You really want to have much more text versus image, and that's based on the amount of data getting through. If you're sending out messages to people with links, you want to click here, you want to click that. Obviously, phishing tools, spam tools are looking at links and trying to determine if they are legitimate or if in fact they're phishing. First thing is you do not want to use IP addresses. So if you've decided you have this thing, you've uploaded to a server, you're using the IP for it, do not link to the IP address. Make sure you have a domain name. That'll right off the bat, on our mail server especially, and most of the ones I'm aware of, will reject any message that uses IPs. So make sure you use the domain name. Also make sure that the hyperlinked address is not different from the URL. And when I do cybersecurity talks, one of the things I talk about the most is you take your mouse, you put it over the link, and make sure that the link is exactly the same as the link it's showing you, and that the link looks legitimate. So we've gotten messages where you'll see, for example, Microsoft, but it's spelled MICROSO and then TF. So it reverses the last two .com. Human eye looks at it and says, oh yeah, it's Microsoft. Make sure you're looking at that. Make sure that your links match. If your links do not match, you will get rejected. And then finally, especially if you're in the marketing side, you can do free searches. One's called Spamhaus, and that's HAUS in the German way. So SPAMHAUS, and that'll let you check if you are in fact on a blacklist, make sure your IP is correct and so forth. Obviously, if you're utilizing third-party tools for newsletters and others, they should have that built in, but that's just something else you can do to make sure your emails are getting through. So now I'm going to quickly jump to email archiving and backup. For those of you not familiar, here is Microsoft's policy. The part I'm really just going to read, the rest of you can read what's on the screen, is Microsoft is not liable for any disruption or loss you may suffer as a result of outages, etc. They are also telling you that they recommend you regularly back up your content and data that you store on their devices. So think about this for a second. You're paying this company, this multi-billion-dollar company, to store your email, your files, your SharePoint, your OneDrive, and they're telling you, hey, we recommend you back it up. Most people don't realize that. They are not responsible for your data. They are not liable for any loss you may suffer as a result. Whether they get hacked, it doesn't make a difference. So Google has a very, very similar policy, just written a little bit differently. Microsoft, you could actually take a clip out. But why is this important? Well, most people don't realize that it's not going to happen. We had a client who was using Microsoft OneDrive. They deleted data, didn't tell us until a month later and said, hey, we need this data. And it was gone for a month. So we went on there, could not be recalled. Called up Microsoft, called up tier 2, tier 3. And again, they're like, well, look, we don't guarantee it. So for our clients, when we bring them on board, we back up the software using our own tool, and it makes a backup on a daily basis or twice a day, depending on our clients. And it literally allows you to have a copy of that data. Now, I'm not going to get into retention policies today because I'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm not going to get into the whole specifics of it. But we back up the mailboxes, the OneDrive, and SharePoint. If you're not utilizing a third-party tool, we recommend it because, again, emails get deleted quickly, they're gone, and then you realize, oh, I needed that data. That being said, there are industries that are very regulated in what you must and must not back up. We've had two clients. Two of those clients both had a policy in place where you're not allowed to have the data beyond a period of time. The reason this came about is because they were subpoenaed in a lawsuit. It had nothing to do with them because somebody had been sending them emails. They had to go look at those emails. They did not have a retention policy. They kept 7 years worth of data. They spent over $200,000 subpoenaed as a witness, not even in the case, to pull up all that data. So while it's important to have backups and make sure you have those, you want to make sure you tie that in with a retention policy. All right, so before I get to any questions, if there are any questions, there's a little bit about us. If you're not familiar with Opfinity, we have been around for 22 years. Basically, to put it simply, we are the IT department for small organizations who don't have their own IT department. So what do we provide? We monitor systems 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We have a help desk that is available. If you want to call at 2 o'clock in the morning, you will actually speak to a technician. We're available for all of our clients 24/7. We provide security, cybersecurity, password management, all of that is included. And again, I don't need to spend all this on here. But basically, if you are looking for an IT provider to handle all your IT, that is what we do. But one or two things I'll put in there is with every one of our clients, we provide a spam filtering software. We provide a email backup as part of it. You can't work with us and be like, oh, well, I don't want that. That's included as required. because the last thing we want is somebody to call us up and be like, well, hey, I didn't get that. So that is what we do as an organization as it relates to email, as it relates to support, security, etc. Before I get to Q&A, a couple things. As I mentioned, we do a monthly webinar. We are always looking for topics. So if you have a topic you want to do, and this topic came about because we got a ton of calls in February and March saying, hey, new email regulations, what are we doing about it? And it's not an IT issue, it's a marketing issue, but obviously the IT piece. So next month, we're going to talk about Outlook. So we're really going to be focusing on Office 365, but the tools, some of the things you can do with Outlook that are much different than you would just in normal, just sending a message. So we'll talk about mail merges, we'll talk about automated emails, we'll talk about some calendaring and so forth. So that comes up in May. In June, we'll be talking about IT budgeting, things you should be looking at, how you can budget it, what the return on investment is. SharePoint, we'll talk about that in July. And then in August, for those of you who have been paying attention, obviously AI is enormous today. Microsoft, of course, is not going to let everybody else have their own AI tools. They are offering Copilot, and it's interesting. Copilot comes with a variety of their things. It starts off at $30 a month to have the AI built into all of your Office 365. And then if you utilize it with things like Dynamics and so forth, it's ridiculously expensive, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to talk about Copilot 365, but that will be coming up in August. So at this point, I'll be happy to take any questions if we have any. I have seen a couple that I've received, but we've already covered the topic. So if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them out in the Q&A. And in the minute, we will move on to the next piece, which is we are giving away an AirTag. So I will wait one more second. I do not see any questions coming in. So at this point, Reese, I will turn it back over to you to finish up and to award somebody an AirTag.
All right, fantastic. Thank you guys all so much for sticking to the end. I know it's hard to shelf off some time on a Wednesday morning, so that is not going noticed by us, and we really appreciate you guys all being here. I see some familiar names, so I'm really excited, and hello, good morning to those I didn't say good morning to before. As a reward for you guys staying the entire time, we are going to be doing our AirTag giveaway. So while Michael was talking, I actually ran it through a name randomizer to make it completely fair. So our AirTag winner is Seda D. So Seda D, I'm going to email you after and get the best address for you. And we're going to send you a free AirTag. So thank you guys so much. Again, I just want to say for future events, it's opfinity.com/events. But also if you found us on LinkedIn, we're going to be posting all the events there as well. So just follow @opfinity on all social media, LinkedIn, to keep up to date on what we're doing. And if anyone has any topics, let me know. All right, you guys have a great rest of your mornings and a great rest of your weeks. Thank you so much again for coming.